In the heart of a glittering Parisian gala, billionaire Zaid Al Fahad's guarded heart encounters Layla, a struggling single mother with a secret. Her soulful dance captivates him, igniting a connection neither expected. As their worlds collide, a shocking truth emerges, altering their lives forever. Stay tuned for this emotional journey. The night sky over Paris glittered like a sea of diamonds. At its heart stood the opulent ballroom of the Hôtel du Palais, hosting an exclusive charity gala. Among the throng of Europe's elite was Zaid Al Fahad, the enigmatic billionaire whose presence commanded attention. Draped in a tailored black suit, his sharp features and piercing hazel eyes exuded power and mystery. He moved with practiced ease, yet his smile rarely reached his eyes. Zaid, a self-made billionaire from the Middle East, was no stranger to the allure of wealth or the obligations that came with it. Tonight, he was here out of duty rather than desire, his reputation as a generous philanthropist preceding him. Yet beneath the polished exterior lay a man burdened by scars of the past. A love once lost had left him emotionally guarded, unwilling to risk his heart again. He sipped his drink, scanning the room with mild disinterest as the orchestra played softly in the background. The glittering jewels, flowing gowns, and hollow laughter of the wealthy offered little solace to a man who craved something real, something money couldn't buy. Introduction to the single mother. In the shadows of the dazzling ballroom, Layla adjusted her dress, her nerves fraying with every passing moment. The traditional, flowing attire felt out of place in such opulence, where wealth dripped from every corner. She glanced down at her trembling hands and closed her eyes, drawing a deep breath. "This is for Sammy," she whispered, the image of her 8-year-old son flashing in her mind. His bright smile and hopeful eyes were her anchor. Layla had been a dancer once, a rising star in her youth, until life's cruel twists pushed her dreams aside. Now she juggled 2 jobs as a waitress and a part-time seamstress, barely scraping by. When the invitation to perform at the gala came, she hesitated. The pay was generous, but the idea of standing before a judgmental audience of the rich and privileged made her stomach churn. Still, the thought of finally paying off Sammy's school fees gave her the courage to say yes. As the MC announced her performance, Layla stepped onto the stage, her heart pounding. She felt the weight of every gaze in the room, a sea of strangers waiting to assess her. For a moment she wanted to turn and run, but the thought of Sammy kept her steady. She straightened her back and began to move. The soft strains of the oud filled the room, and Layla let the music guide her. Her movements were fluid and graceful, each step a testament to years of training and the emotion she had poured into her craft. Her dance was a story of pain, resilience, and hope, a silent language needing no translation. Zaid, who had been indifferent to the evening's events, found himself captivated, his gaze locked onto Layla, unable to look away. There was something about her, a raw, unfiltered passion that stirred something deep within him. The way she moved was not just elegant but soulful, as if she were baring her very soul to the audience. As the performance reached its crescendo, the room fell silent, the attendees enraptured by her artistry. When the final note faded, the applause was thunderous, but Layla barely heard it. She bowed quickly, eager to retreat into the safety of anonymity. Zaid watched as Layla disappeared behind the curtain. His curiosity was piqued, a rare feeling for a man who had seen it all. He excused himself from a business associate and followed her path. Backstage, Layla was packing her things, her nerves still raw from the performance. When she turned and found Zaid standing there, her breath hitched. "Your performance was remarkable," he said, his voice low and smooth, with a faint accent that added to his allure. "I've never seen anything quite like it." Layla swallowed hard, her instinct to retreat kicking in. "Thank you," she said simply, avoiding his gaze. She was acutely aware of the disparity between them, his tailored suit, his polished demeanor, and her own modest appearance. "I'm Zaid Al-Fahad," he continued, extending his hand. "May I ask your name?" "Layla," she replied hesitantly, shaking his hand briefly. His touch was warm, his grip firm but not overbearing. "You have a gift, Layla," he said, his hazel eyes meeting hers. "Your dance. It was more than art. It was emotion, raw and unfiltered. Rarely does something move me the way it did tonight." Layla felt her cheeks flush. Compliments like these weren't new to her, but coming from a man like Zaid, they carried unexpected weight. Still, she was wary. "I'm glad you enjoyed it," she said, her tone polite but guarded. Zaid studied her, sensing her reluctance. "Forgive me if I'm overstepping," he said, his tone softening, "but I'd like to know what inspires such depth in your performance." Layla hesitated. How could she explain that her dance was born of struggle, that every step was a testament to years of sacrifice and heartbreak? "It's personal," she said finally. "I dance because it's the one thing in my life that feels true." Zaid nodded, sensing the weight of her words. "Personal stories often carry the most beauty," he said. "Thank you for sharing it with us tonight." As he turned to leave, he paused, glancing back at her. "If you ever perform again, I hope I'll be fortunate enough to witness it." Layla watched him go, her emotions a mix of confusion and intrigue. There was something about Zaid that unsettled her, not in a threatening way, but in a way that made her feel exposed, as if he could see the cracks in her carefully constructed facade. The aftermath. Later that night, Layla sat in her small apartment, watching Sami as he slept. She replayed the evening in her mind, her encounter with Zaid lingering like a melody she couldn't forget. There was a warmth in his words, a sincerity that caught her off guard. But she reminded herself that men like him lived in a different world, one where she and Sami didn't belong. Unbeknownst to her, Zaid sat in his luxury suite, thinking of her as well. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of something he couldn't quite name, something he thought he'd lost long ago. Part 2. The Proposition, a Bold Offer. 2 days after the gala, Layla was surprised to receive a call from an unfamiliar number. She hesitated before answering, her voice cautious. "Hello? Ms. Layla, this is Zaid Al-Fahad." His deep, unmistakable voice sent a jolt through her, and she felt her breath hitch. "Oh, Mr. Al-Fahad," she managed, unsure why he was calling. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said, his tone polite yet firm. "I was wondering if we could meet to discuss a proposal I have for you. It involves your dancing." Layla's heart raced. She had thought about him since the gala, though she tried to push those thoughts aside. Now, hearing from him directly left her unsettled. "I'm not sure what kind of proposal you mean," she replied cautiously. "I'd prefer to explain in person," Zaid said smoothly. "Could you meet me at the Hotel Royale tomorrow afternoon? The details are best discussed privately." Layla hesitated. The thought of meeting a man like Zaid in such a luxurious setting felt overwhelming, but she couldn't ignore the opportunity. Sami's face flashed in her mind. "All right," she said finally. "I'll be there." The next day, Layla found herself in a posh private lounge at the Hotel Royale. Zaid was already there, looking impossibly elegant in a navy suit. He rose as she entered, his presence commanding yet warm. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing for her to sit. Once she was settled, Zaid leaned forward slightly, his gaze intent. "Your performance at the gala was extraordinary, Layla. I believe your talent deserves a wider audience. I'm hosting a private event next month and would like you to perform as the centerpiece. It's a significant gathering, and I'm prepared to compensate you generously." Layla's eyes widened. She wasn't used to such opportunities, and the mention of generous compensation made her pulse quicken. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure I'm the right fit for something so exclusive," she said carefully. Zaid's lips curved into a small smile. You underestimate yourself. Your authenticity is precisely what makes you unique. And I'm willing to make it worth your while. More than enough to ease your financial burdens. His words struck a chord. Layla didn't want to seem desperate, but she couldn't deny that the money could change her life. May I think about it? She asked. Of course, Zaid said, his voice softening. Take all the time you need. As she left the meeting, Layla felt a mix of hope and apprehension. She wasn't sure why Zaid had taken such an interest in her, but the opportunity was too significant to ignore. A few days later, Layla accepted Zaid's offer, and preparations for the performance began. They met frequently to discuss the details, and with each meeting, Layla found herself learning more about him. Zaid was meticulous in his planning, but he was also attentive, always asking for her input and ensuring she was comfortable. Layla couldn't help but notice the contrast between his sharp, businesslike demeanor and the moments when he let his guard down, revealing a kinder, more vulnerable side. During one such meeting, Zaid asked, "What made you start dancing?" Layla hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "It's always been a part of me," she said finally. "When I was younger, it was my escape, a way to express myself when words weren't enough. Life has taken me in different directions since, but dancing is the one thing that's always felt true." Zaid nodded thoughtfully. "You speak of it with such passion. It's rare to see someone so connected to their craft." "What about you?" Layla asked, surprising herself with the question. "What drives you?" Zaid leaned back, his gaze distant. "Responsibility," he said after a moment. "Building an empire comes with expectations, and meeting them often takes precedence over personal desires. But there are moments, rare ones, when I encounter something genuine, and it reminds me of why I started in the first place." Layla felt a pang of empathy. She saw a man who, despite his immense wealth and success, carried a heavy burden. "It sounds lonely," she said quietly. Zaid's eyes met hers, and for a moment the world seemed to fall away. "It can be," he admitted, "but meeting people like you reminds me that there's more to life than obligations." The warmth in his voice made Layla's cheeks flush. She quickly looked away, focusing on the notes in front of her. As their meetings continued, Zaid couldn't ignore the growing connection between them. Layla's resilience and dedication intrigued him, and he found himself drawn to her in ways he hadn't anticipated. But he also noticed her guardedness, particularly when the conversation veered toward her personal life. One evening, as they wrapped up a session, Zaid noticed Layla clutching a delicate silver locket around her neck. It was a habit she seemed to fall into whenever she was deep in thought or nervous. "That's a beautiful piece," Zaid said, nodding toward the locket. Layla's hand flew to the necklace as if she hadn't realized she was touching it. "Thank you," she said, her tone clipped. "Does it have special meaning?" he asked gently. Layla hesitated, her fingers tightening around the locket. "It was a gift," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Zaid sensed there was more to the story, but he chose not to press her. "It suits you," he said instead, offering a small smile. "Thank you," Layla replied, her expression softening. As she left that evening, Zaid couldn't shake the feeling that the locket held a piece of Layla's story, one she wasn't ready to share. And for reasons he couldn't quite understand, he wanted to uncover it. Later that night, Layla sat in her modest apartment, holding the locket in her hands. Inside was a tiny photo of Sammy as a baby, his cherubic face smiling up at her. The locket was more than a piece of jewelry. It was a reminder of the life she had fought to build for her son. She thought about Zaid and the way he looked at her, as if he could see past her walls. It terrified her. She couldn't afford to let anyone get too close, especially someone like him. Meanwhile, in his penthouse suite, Zaid stared out at the city lights, his thoughts lingering on Layla. There was something about her, something he couldn't explain. For the first time in years, He felt the stirrings of emotions he thought he had buried, but he also knew that Layla was hiding something, and he wasn't sure if he was prepared for what he might discover. The night of Zaid's private event arrived with an air of anticipation. Held in his sprawling estate just outside the city, the gathering was an intimate affair, attended by an exclusive circle of his closest business associates and friends. The ballroom, adorned with golden chandeliers and silk drapes, radiated opulence. A small stage was set at the room's centre, and all eyes were on it as the lights dimmed and the soft strains of music began to play. Layla stepped onto the stage, her breath steady but heart racing. Dressed in a flowing gown that shimmered under the lights, she looked ethereal, her presence commanding attention without effort. As the music swelled, she began to move, each step a perfect harmony of grace and emotion. Her dance told a story, one of love, loss, and resilience. Her movements were not merely technical, they were infused with a vulnerability that captivated the audience. The room was silent, save for the melody that wrapped around her like a second skin. Zaid stood at the edge of the room, his hazel eyes fixed on her. He had anticipated being impressed, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. Layla wasn't just dancing, she was baring her soul, each movement a window into her innermost emotions. He felt a stirring in his chest, something he hadn't experienced in years. As the performance came to an end, the audience erupted in applause, but Layla's eyes sought only one face in the crowd. She found Zaid watching her, his expression unreadable yet intense. A spark passed between them, fleeting but undeniable. After the performance, Zaid found Layla standing alone on the balcony, gazing out at the moonlit gardens. He approached her silently, his footsteps soft against the marble floor. "You were magnificent," he said, his voice low. Layla turned, startled, but his warm expression eased her tension. "Thank you," she replied, her voice soft. "I wasn't sure how it would be received." Zaid stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "You have a way of drawing people in. It's not just your talent, it's the emotion behind it. Watching you tonight, it felt like I was seeing a part of you no one else has seen." Layla looked away, her fingers brushing against the locket she always wore. "Dance is the only place I can be myself," she admitted. "Everything else in my life feels heavy." Zaid studied her, noticing the shadow of sadness that lingered in her eyes. "You carry it well," he said gently, "but you don't have to bear it alone." His words touched a place in Layla's heart she had long kept locked away. For a moment she felt the urge to share her burdens, to let him see the woman behind the facade. But fear held her back. "Thank you, Mr. Al-Fahad," she said, her tone formal. "You've been very kind." "Call me Zaid," he said, his lips curving into a small smile. "I'd like us to be more than mere acquaintances." Layla nodded, but the weight of her secret reminded her to tread carefully. The evening continued with laughter and conversation, but Zaid's mind remained on Layla. As the last guests departed, he found her again, sitting by the fountain in his garden. The moonlight bathed her in a soft glow, making her look almost otherworldly. "May I join you?" he asked. Layla nodded, and he sat beside her, the sound of trickling water filling the silence between them. "I don't usually share much about myself," Zaid began, his tone contemplative. "But there's something about you that makes it feel easier." Layla glanced at him, surprised by his vulnerability. "What do you mean?" Zaid looked up at the night sky, his expression pensive. "Years ago I trusted someone with my heart, a woman I thought I'd spend my life with. But she betrayed me, not just personally, but in ways that left scars on my family and my business. It taught me to be cautious, to keep people at a distance." Layla's heart ached at the pain in his voice. "That must have been hard," she said softly. "It was," Zaid admitted. "But seeing you tonight, feeling the emotion in your performance, It reminded me that not everyone is out to hurt you. There's still beauty and sincerity in the world. Layla felt a lump rise in her throat. She wanted to tell him her own truth, to let him see the struggles that had shaped her. But the fear of rejection kept her silent. "I'm sorry for what you went through," she said instead. "But I think it's brave of you to still believe in beauty and sincerity." Zaid's gaze lingered on her, his eyes searching hers. "And you, Layla? What burdens do you carry that make your dance so powerful?" Layla hesitated, her fingers once again finding the locket. "Some stories are too heavy to share," she said finally. Zaid nodded, respecting her boundaries. "When you're ready, I'll be here," he said softly. As the days passed, Zaid and Layla spent more time together, preparing for her next performance and discussing plans for Sammy's future. Their conversations became more personal, the walls between them slowly crumbling. One afternoon, Zaid surprised Layla by visiting her modest apartment to drop off a new costume he had commissioned for her. Sammy, curious and full of energy, greeted him at the door. "You must be Sammy," Zaid said with a warm smile. The boy nodded, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Are you Mama's boss?" Zaid chuckled. "Something like that." Layla appeared, slightly flustered. "You didn't have to come all this way," she said, trying to mask her embarrassment. "I wanted to," Zaid replied, his tone sincere. "Besides, I wanted to meet the young man you've told me so much about." Sammy grinned, clearly enamored with Zaid's charm. Watching them interact, Layla felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was a side of Zaid she hadn't seen before, gentle, caring, and genuinely interested in her son. As Zaid prepared to leave, he turned to Layla. "You're stronger than you realize, Layla, and you don't have to do this alone." Her heart skipped a beat at his words, but she quickly reminded herself of the boundaries she needed to maintain. "Thank you, Zaid," she said softly. As he walked away, Layla couldn't help but wonder if she was strong enough to let him in, or if her secrets would ultimately push him away. Days turned into weeks, and the connection between Layla and Zaid grew stronger, though both remained cautious. Layla often found herself caught between the warmth Zaid offered and the walls she had built to protect her and Sammy. One evening, Zaid invited Layla and Sammy to join him for a day at the city's botanical gardens. The afternoon was filled with laughter and light-hearted moments as Zaid bonded with Sammy, teaching him how to skip stones across a pond. Layla watched from a distance, her heart both full and conflicted. As they sat under the shade of a sprawling tree, Zaid turned to Layla. "I've been meaning to ask," he began, his tone gentle. "What happened to Sammy's father?" Layla froze, her fingers tightening on the locket instinctively. The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken truths. "He's not in the picture," she said carefully, her gaze fixed on the ground. Zaid frowned slightly, sensing there was more to the story. "Did he choose not to be involved?" Layla shook her head. "It's complicated," she whispered. "I had to make choices to protect Sammy, and it's not something I talk about easily." Zaid reached out, his hand brushing hers. "Layla, you don't have to tell me everything, but I want you to know that I'm here. No judgment, no pressure, just someone who cares." The sincerity in his voice unraveled something inside her. For the first time, Layla allowed herself to consider the possibility of trusting him, even with the parts of her life she had kept hidden. The peace Layla had begun to find was shattered one afternoon when she received an unexpected call. The voice on the other end sent a chill down her spine. "Layla," the man said, his tone smooth but laced with the kind of arrogance that made her stomach churn. "It's Tariq. I think it's time we talked." Tariq, Sammy's father. A name she hadn't heard in years, one she had worked hard to leave behind. Memories of their turbulent relationship flooded her mind. His charm that quickly turned to manipulation, his empty promises, and the day she left to protect her son. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice cold. "I want to see my son," Tariq replied. "I deserve to be a part of his life." Layla's heart pounded. "You lost that right a long time ago." she snapped. "Sammy doesn't even know who you are." "He will soon," Tariq said, his voice darkening. "You can't keep him from me forever." The call ended abruptly, leaving Layla shaken. She clutched the locket, tears welling in her eyes. She had fought so hard to create a safe life for Sammy, and now the past was threatening to unravel everything. Later that evening, Zaid arrived at Layla's apartment for a planned dinner with her and Sammy. He immediately noticed her strained expression. "Layla, is everything all right?" he asked, concern etched on his face. She hesitated, torn between keeping her troubles to herself and sharing them with someone she was starting to trust. Finally, she sighed. "It's Tariq, Sammy's father. He called me today." Zaid's jaw tightened. "What did he want?" "He says he wants to see Sammy," Layla said, her voice trembling. "But I know him, Zaid. He's not interested in being a father. He just wants control. I left him for a reason." Zaid's expression darkened with protectiveness. "Layla, you don't have to face this alone. If Tariq becomes a problem, I'll make sure he understands that Sammy's well-being comes first." His words brought a surge of relief, but also fear. "I don't want to drag you into this, Zaid," she said softly. "This is my fight." "It's ours now," he replied firmly. "You and Sammy mean more to me than you realize." Layla's eyes glistened with unshed tears. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of her struggles begin to lift. Not because they were gone, but because she wasn't carrying them alone. Despite Zaid's reassurance, Layla couldn't shake the fear of Tariq's potential interference. Her days became a balancing act of preparing for her next performance and shielding Sammy from the shadows of the past. Meanwhile, Zaid quietly took steps to ensure their safety, enlisting his legal team to investigate Tariq's claims and history. He also spent more time with Sammy, forming a bond that filled Layla with both joy and trepidation. But the closer they grew, the more Layla felt the urgency of revealing her full truth to Zaid. She knew he deserved to know the whole story, not just fragments. One evening, as they sat in the quiet of her living room, Layla took a deep breath. "Zaid, there's something I need to tell you," she began, her voice trembling. He turned to her, his expression calm but attentive. "I'm listening." "I didn't just leave Tariq because he was controlling," she said, her hands twisting in her lap. "He was dangerous. There were times I feared for Sammy's safety. That's why I left everything behind, why I've been so guarded." Zaid's jaw tightened, anger flashing in his eyes. "Layla, you don't have to explain yourself. Protecting Sammy was the right thing to do. No one has the right to judge you for that." His unwavering support brought tears to her eyes. "I just needed you to know," she whispered. Zaid reached out, taking her hands in his. "Thank you for trusting me. I promise, Layla, I'll do everything in my power to keep you and Sammy safe." As they sat in the warmth of their shared understanding, Layla felt a flicker of hope. The storm wasn't over, but for the first time, she believed they could weather it together. The sleek black car cut through the city streets as Zaid stared blankly out the window. The driver navigated through the traffic, but Zaid's mind was far from the bustling lights and noises of the city. Layla's tearful confession replayed in his thoughts, each word slicing through his chest like a blade. His brother, his once beloved Rami, had not only abandoned a woman he claimed to love, but also left behind a son, a child he never even knew existed. Zaid clenched his jaw, anger bubbling beneath the surface. Anger at Rami for his selfishness, anger at Layla for hiding the truth, and anger at himself for feeling something deeper than anger, an unshakable connection to Sammy and a growing affection for Layla that he couldn't ignore. When he arrived at his penthouse, the vast, luxurious space felt colder than ever. The opulent furnishings, once symbols of his success, now seemed hollow. He poured himself a drink, the amber liquid swirling in the glass as he stared out over the city skyline. How could his brother, his idol, his confidant, betray the principles they were raised with? And how could Zaid reconcile the fact that the boy who had so effortlessly won his heart was his nephew? Zaid let out a deep sigh, his thoughts drifting to Layla. Despite his frustration, he couldn't deny the pull he felt toward her. Her strength, her resilience, the way she fiercely protected Sammy, it all captivated him. Yet, the weight of their shared history made the path ahead uncertain. For the next few days, Zaid kept his distance. He avoided Layla's calls, needing space to sort through the whirlwind of emotions. Layla, on the other hand, sat in her small apartment, anxiously staring at her phone. The silence from Zaid was deafening, each passing hour amplifying her fear of losing everything she had built with him. Layla busied herself with everyday tasks, but her heart wasn't in it. Every smile she gave Sammy felt forced, her mind consumed with worries. What if Zaid decided to walk away? What if he couldn't forgive her for keeping the truth about Sammy hidden? She thought of the moments they had shared, the quiet conversations, the way he had looked at her as if she were the only person in the room. For the first time in years, she had allowed herself to believe in something more, to hope for a life where she wasn't carrying the weight of the world alone. And now, that hope felt like it was slipping through her fingers. One evening, as she tucked Sammy into bed, he looked up at her with wide, innocent eyes. "Mama, when can Uncle Zaid come over again? He promised to show me how to play chess." Layla's throat tightened, but she forced a smile. "Soon, sweetheart," she said softly, stroking his hair. "Uncle Zaid just has a lot on his mind right now." Sammy nodded, satisfied with her answer, and drifted off to sleep. Layla sat by his bedside for a long time, watching him breathe. She knew she couldn't shield him from the truth forever, but for now she would do everything in her power to protect his happiness. Meanwhile, Zaid found himself unable to focus on work. Thoughts of Sammy's laughter and Layla's tears haunted him. His assistant noticed his distracted state but wisely chose not to comment. One afternoon, while flipping through some documents, Zaid found a crumpled drawing Sammy had given him during their first meeting. It was a simple sketch of a man, a woman, and a child, all holding hands under a bright sun. The label underneath read, "My Family." Zaid stared at the drawing, the childish lines blurring as his vision grew misty. Sammy's innocence was a stark contrast to the turmoil in his own heart. He didn't ask for this chaos, this complicated history. He only wanted to be loved and cared for. That realization prompted Zaid to make a decision. Later that evening, he arrived unannounced at Layla's apartment, carrying a small gift for Sammy. Layla opened the door, her expression a mixture of surprise and relief. "Zaid," she said softly, "I wasn't sure if I'd see you again." "I needed time," Zaid admitted, stepping inside. "But I realized I was being selfish. Sammy doesn't deserve to suffer because of my inability to handle the truth." Layla nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "He asks about you every day." Zaid smiled faintly. "I've missed him too." Sammy's delighted squeal echoed through the apartment as he ran into the room. "Uncle Zaid!" he shouted, throwing his arms around Zaid's legs. Zaid crouched down to Sammy's level, ruffling his hair. "I hope you've been practicing your chess moves," he teased. "I have. I'm going to beat you next time," Sammy declared, his face glowing with happiness. Later that evening, after Sammy had gone to bed, Zaid and Layla sat together in the small living room. The silence between them was heavy but not uncomfortable. "Thank you for coming back," Layla said quietly. Zaid looked at her, his gaze soft. "I couldn't stay away," he admitted. "Not from Sammy. And not from you." Layla's breath caught, her heart pounding in her chest. "Zaid, He held up a hand, stopping her. "Let me finish," he said. "I was angry at first, Layla. Angry at Rami for what he did to you, angry at myself for not seeing the truth sooner. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that my anger doesn't matter. What matters is Sammy, and you. I can't change the past, but I can choose to be here now. For both of you." Tears streamed down Layla's cheeks as she listened to his words. "I was so scared I'd lost you," she whispered. "You haven't lost me," Zaid said firmly, "and you never will." In that moment, something shifted between them. The walls that had kept them apart began to crumble, replaced by a fragile but undeniable connection. Zaid reached for her hand, his touch gentle but steady. "We'll figure this out together," he said. "No more secrets, no more running, just us." Layla nodded, her heart filled with a mix of relief and hope. For the first time in years, she felt like she wasn't alone. Zaid stood at the edge of the balcony in his penthouse, the crisp evening air carrying the faint hum of the city below. In his hand, he held Sammy's drawing, a simple depiction of a family holding hands under a bright sun. The childish lines stirred something profound within him. For weeks he had grappled with his emotions, anger, confusion, guilt. But now one thing had become clear. He couldn't let his fears or the betrayals of the past rob him of the chance to build a future with Layla and Sammy. The next morning, Zaid made his way to Layla's apartment, his heart pounding with anticipation. When the door opened, Layla stood there, her expression a mix of surprise and uncertainty. "Zaid," she said softly, stepping aside to let him in. "I need to talk to you," Zaid began, his tone earnest. Layla gestured for him to sit, though her nerves were evident in the way she fidgeted with her hands. "What is it?" Zaid took a deep breath, his gaze locking onto hers. "I've been wrong, Layla. I let my own pain cloud my judgment, and I hurt you in the process. I'm sorry for walking away when you needed me most." Layla's eyes widened, tears pooling as his words sank in. "I'm not perfect," Zaid continued. "I've made mistakes. But I want to do better. For Sammy. For you. I don't want to run anymore. I want to be here, with you, as a partner and as a father figure to Sammy. If you'll have me." Layla's breath hitched, her heart aching with both relief and hope. "Zaid, I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," Zaid said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Say you'll let me be a part of your life, and that we can build something together." Layla looked into his eyes, searching for any hesitation. She found none, only sincerity. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, Zaid." From that day forward, Zaid made good on his promise. He became a constant presence in Sammy's life, taking him to school, teaching him chess, and spending hours helping with homework. The bond between them deepened, and Sammy began to see Zaid not just as an uncle, but as the father figure he had never known. At the same time, Zaid encouraged Layla to dream again. One evening, as they sat together in her living room, he brought up an idea that had been on his mind. "You once told me that dance is how you express yourself," Zaid began, taking her hand. "I want to help you share that gift with the world." Layla tilted her head, a puzzled smile on her lips. "What do you mean?" "I want to help you open a dance academy," Zaid explained. "A place where you can teach others and inspire them the way you've inspired me. It's time for you to follow your dreams, Layla." Layla stared at him, tears brimming in her eyes. "Zaid, I don't know if I can." "You can," Zaid said firmly, "and I'll be with you every step of the way." With Zaid's support, Layla began planning the academy. Zaid used his resources to secure a beautiful space in the heart of the city, while Layla poured her heart into designing classes and programs that would make the academy a haven for aspiring dancers. Watching Layla come alive as she pursued her passion filled Zaid with a sense of pride and joy he hadn't felt in years. At the same time, Layla's warmth and determination inspired Zaid to heal from his own wounds, teaching him that love was worth the risk. Sammy thrived in this new chapter of their lives, adoring Zaid and often declaring how much he loved his family. His laughter filled the apartment, a constant reminder of the happiness they had all found together. Months passed, and the dance academy's grand opening drew near. One evening, as the three of them stood together in the beautifully decorated space, Zaid turned to Layla with a thoughtful expression. "There's one more thing I need to do," he said, taking her hand. "What is it?" Layla asked, curiosity sparking in her eyes. Zaid knelt on one knee, pulling out a small velvet box from his pocket. Layla's hands flew to her mouth as he opened it to reveal a stunning diamond ring. Layla, Zaid began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. From the moment I met you, I saw a strength and resilience I've never seen in anyone else. You've given me more than I ever thought possible, a chance to love, to be part of a family, and to dream again. I want to spend the rest of my life with you and Sammy. Will you marry me? Tears streamed down Layla's cheeks as she nodded, her voice trembling with joy. Yes, Zaid. 1,000 times yes. Sammy, who had been watching with wide eyes, jumped up and hugged them both. Does this mean we're a real family now? He asked excitedly. Zaid smiled, ruffling Sammy's hair. We've always been a real family, Sammy. This just makes it official. The story culminated in a beautiful wedding held in the gardens of Zaid's estate. Layla wore a flowing gown that shimmered in the sunlight, while Sammy walked her down the aisle, his face beaming with pride. Zaid stood at the altar, his eyes fixed on Layla as if she were the only person in the world. As they exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other, it felt like the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope, love, and endless possibilities. The reception was a joyous affair with laughter, dancing, and heartfelt speeches. Sammy stole the show with a small performance he had prepared, earning cheers and applause from everyone. As the evening came to a close, Zaid and Layla stood under the starlit sky, their hands intertwined. I never thought I'd find this, Zaid admitted softly. Neither did I, Layla replied, resting her head against his shoulder. But we did, Zaid said, kissing her forehead. And I'm never letting it go. In that moment, they knew their love, born from unexpected circumstances, was the foundation of a life they would build together, filled with happiness, family, and dreams fulfilled.